Now, there have been numerous writings and commentary on how the outbreak of COVID-19 in South Africa has exposed lapses in key sectors such as health, energy and social services. And adding his voice to this discourse, the political analyst Dr Ralph Mathekga says that politically the government has failed to pursue its agenda with efficiency. Mathekga says that this is not only notable in relation to the handling of COVID-19, but in general policy implementation even before the outbreak of the pandemic. Dr. Mathekga contends that despite the general poor performance of cabinet and corruption allegations in some instances, there has not been proper management of the situation, accompanied, of course, by consequences to assure the public that political leaders are in tune with the people. Political analyst Dr. Ralph Mathekga joins us now to give greater perspective here on these musings and others. Dr. Mathekga, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to your viewers. Thanks for inviting me.
So your observation, at least some of it, speaks to the 6th Parliament, and you say that it feels like a long spell of poor performance in cabinet without any real pretense to even try and change things by reshuffling ministers, for instance. So let's talk about that, especially in the context of what started out as Ramaphoria and a new dawn and Operation Cleanup, as we were told. So what's happened to all of that?
Well, Sakina, I've been following it from the beginning. I mean, before the COVID, there was a sense that there will be cleanup, as you correctly state, in government. There is the new dawn. There is a new way of doing things. And what we have seen actually in this first cabinet, I mean, this has been the cabinet since the beginning of this 6th term. Probably this has been the longest cabinet in recent times without any reshuffle. But if you look at its performance, it is a compromise cabinet, no doubt about it. Some ministers who have been drafted from the previous cabinet and have been put in there. Clearly, it was very clear that there has been a lot of politics in putting together this cabinet. But again, we have not seen it marching differently because they are under the new boss, who happens to be the new head of the executive, the president. Things have been more or less the same. I mean, the president has been instigating his own anti-corruption maneuver, which is working on the margin, but one cannot say it expresses itself at the center of policy. You still have problems. We have battled with mediocrity in this cabinet. They have not given a sense of what exactly to do with the lapses at some state-owned entities. And the bigger part that we have had so far has been the public relations, that things are going well, we are focused and so forth. Then came the COVID. My view was that when the pandemic came about, it will give this cabinet a sense of urgency to say that we are no longer going to do it the same way. We are now in a moment of crisis and we are going to at least do things differently. But that hasn't helped. Actually, if there is anything that has been incurred by South Africans during the COVID, it is rapid expenditure, which just led to rapid corruption. The highest amount of money in the shortest space of time. It is the story of the PPEs. And to add to this, Sakina, we have not seen a reshuffle. And when you are not seeing a reshuffle, it gives you a sense that there is something normal happening. And there is nothing normal actually about this cabinet. It has been quite disastrous. And I do think that a cabinet reshuffle is required. I mean, we are some of the few nations that have had to lose a minister of health to corruption. It's quite worrying. For me, it's almost that tipping point that says that you cannot continue, take a podium and say that we're doing well in the fight against COVID while you have all these things happening. There is no cabinet reshuffle. It worries me. And my sense is that it is the politics that is holding back cabinet reshuffle, Sakina.
Let's talk about the cabinet reshuffle that you are saying is perhaps apt at this point, but why? And, you know, what would that prove in any instance?
The first thing is to acknowledge that there's been serious lapses. I mean, with all the scandals that we have seen in the health sector, at times involving the construction of the fence, some of the departments that have been involved, even your security, the South African police services, look at the level of crime and all that. If you look at the performance of this cabinet, it cannot be that you retain all the ministers. I've seen one of my colleagues also even writing in his op-ed bad, even pointing out to certain departments to say that, look, these ministers need to go. We have not seen a stellar performance to a point where one can justify why we still have the same cabinet for such a long period of time. I mean, Sakina, we are almost halfway into this term. And can we really stand in front of the mirror and say that we are happy with the current leadership, we are happy with the current cabinet, ministers are holding their own, and we have to continue? Cabinet reshuffle is the first acknowledgement that we have not done well. And when you put new ministers, that only signals a potential that something different can be done. But now we don't even have that acknowledgement that we have not done well. We just carry on. It's just not working well. It doesn't look good.
Ralph, if there were to be a cabinet reshuffle, who to your mind would be the most obvious people to get the boot? Or do you believe that they could be shuffled into other portfolios? Who would you say most obviously are the ones whose heads should be on the chopping block?
You know, Sakina, I'm looking now at government departments that I would say are more at the forefront of what we are seeing, or are at the forefront of maybe even this bigger push, the bigger fight against the COVID. The first department is the Department of Health. And even before the scandal came about, there should have been very deep questions about the management, but the scandal came about that resulted in Minister Zweli Mkhize having to vacate his position and fill up that position. I would say the president should try to consider really filling up that position. It is a position that cannot be left to an acting minister in a moment such as this. You really need leadership at that. Fill up that position. But also, you look at the Minister of Police as well. What is going on in the Minister of Police? We get reports and so forth. Crime is really bad, and it has actually even escalated since the management of the pandemic. It is where you have a concern at that department as well. Public enterprises, what is happening at public enterprises? Perhaps people have run out of energy. The Department of Energy as well, speaking of energy, Sakina, those are the areas where you see the most visible policy lapses. I'm not saying other departments should not be taken seriously, but at this point in time, those are the key departments that I think, to me, either something has to happen in those departments, you have to demonstrate progress, or you have to do something about leadership in those departments, particularly the health department, Sakina.
So earlier on, you touched on state-owned enterprises in your comment. Let's talk about that and what's happening, especially in an era of state capture and what has happened and what is currently happening. What are your views on what is currently happening to our state-owned entities?
Well, there is no doubt, Sakina, that South Africans are concerned about the rampant corruption that had taken place at the state-owned entities. We can all agree. But the difficulty here is, what do we do with that? Do we privatize? We have seen an interesting move regarding South African Airways. I've spoken about it in the past, that my biggest doubt is whether this current government under the ANC, does it have that moral legitimacy to even oversee a transaction that will involve a proper privatization or a proper unbundling? For example, South African Airways. We have had a report coming out about South African Airways, private equities coming in. There isn't transparency. And for me, this is exactly the point that concerns me, that while the public is so heightened on anti-corruption, the last thing you want is a deal that does not have clear transparency. I mean, South Africans want to be relieved of the responsibility to bail out their public asset. But I don't think South Africans are willing to let go of their public asset at a price of scrap metal, which seems to have been orchestrated by the governing party. South Africans still have value that they need to secure in those state-owned assets. So the process has to be diligent. You just cannot sell it to someone who is just willing to pick it up quickly. You have to consider the value that is in that. The pricing has to be fair and honest. My concern is that it appears as if the focus now is just to rid the taxpayer of the burden of these entities without doing it properly, without protecting the value that remain in those entities. And that is why there are these concerns about transparency, Sakina. These transactions have to be transparent. We are not in the process of just getting rid of state asset. we are trying to alleviate the taxpayer in the most fair and the best and the least costly way possible. It requires transparency. There need to be more transparency in relation to this. And for me, Sakina, the problem is when this project of unbundling that are associated with individuals, where is the ANC in all of this? Where is the party? You don't want a situation where if a new leader are sent to the ANC, it changes government policy altogether because it relies on the whims of individuals instead of being a position that is sustained within the party. The ANC seems to be absent without leave in all of this, Sakina.
And speaking of state-owned entities, there is, of course, a school of thought. There are those who feel that one of the people who should get the boot, who should be reshuffled or shuffled out, would be Minister Pravin Gordhan, given the dire state that many of the bigger state-owned entities find themselves in. What's your thought on that?
I will not pick a fight with those people, Sakina, who are suggesting that should happen. I mean, really, at some point, we have to look at the substantive matters. We have to look at what people put on the table. We have had long, drawn process where we are trying to understand the position of the minister vis-a-vis the position of the president in relation to that of the party. And of course, it's not just the minister's individual prerogative to give us a clear sense. It's also the system as it stands now, how the party's position and also the president's agenda. But the minister has not shown an incredible performance in that department. I'm one of the people who like to look at the substantive matters, Sakina. I don't think I can pick a fight to say save the minister. I don't think I can pick a fight to say save the minister at energy at this point. I don't think I will do that. Those are key portfolios that perhaps maybe you just need new energy in those portfolios. You need creativity. Perhaps the current ministers have been so much embedded in the problem in those sectors that they just cannot see out of it, Sakina.
And just finally, in terms of the balance of forces within the party that many would say actually informs whether these appointments are made and also whether a reshuffle does take place and how it actually is effected. How do you respond to that? And the position of the president at this point in time? Ministers serve at his behest. Is he in a weaker or stronger position at this stage in order to make the sort of changes that you and others may think are necessary at this point?
I think, Sakina, the circumstances dictate a reshuffle. The president should find it inevitable that a reshuffle ought to happen. If you look at the concern that South Africans have, it also states what kind of minister you actually need in those positions. I mean, gone are those days when the ANC had a wider latitude among as to who to put, sometimes not even finding it necessary to justify it to the general public. People have got expectations as to what they want to see at the health departments, at the energy sector, because of the challenges that they've engulfed those sectors. So I do think President Ramaphosa is in a good position in a sense that he can just point outside to say that, look outside, look at the feelings and concerns of South Africans, unless otherwise someone wants to dismiss the feelings and concerns of South Africans outside the ANC.
Dr. Ralph Mathekga will have to leave it there. Political analyst arguing that the government could have done better by showing decisive leadership with consequences of leadership changes through reshuffles in fixing some of the critical sectors that have been compromised by general poor performance during and before the pandemic. So we'd love to hear your views as always. Let us know at Morning Live SABC. And this is where we unfortunately have to leave it with our SABC 2 viewers.